Hello and welcome. You are listening to the Gay with God podcast, a safe place for us to share our stories and support one another. How long did we know? What challenges did we face? Did we lose our faith? When did we find our way back home? Or are we still searching? The stories you hear on this podcast will melt your heart and strengthen your belief that in God, all things are possible, and you can be authentically gay with the God of your understanding. I am your host, Midge Noble, and I am very honored that you are here. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Gay with God podcast. This is Midge Noble, and I'm your host, and I'm also the author of Gay with God, Reclaiming My Faith and Honoring My Story. I really appreciate you being here and always showing up every week, and hopefully it will continue to be every week. Pretty soon, longer than it probably needs to be, but pretty soon I'm going to be having surgery on my right shoulder, a total shoulder replacement, something or other. I'm trying to pay attention to what it is, but I'm also trying to not pay too much attention to what they're going to do, because I just really am overwhelmed and don't want to have the surgery, but it's a necessary thing for the quality of my life and really, really terrifying. Today, our episode is used to know, now you don't. And that seems to be where my life is right now. And I'm wondering if any of you out there are having the same kind of experience that I'm having. What I mean by that is that you may have, even back when you were a child, had this idea of who you were going to become, what you wanted to be. You know, kids are always saying, I want to be this, because they're asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they're asked to, in, a very young age, to kind of predict what they may be doing later in their lifetime. And I think that's kind of a shame in one way, although it's kind of cute in another. But, once you start to name something, you put energy out into the universe. And then once you've named it, depends on the type of person you are, you may kind of lock yourself into that. As a child, I really had a very strong sense of what I thought I needed to be. And we've talked about this before, as far as pleasing God and making sure that I would be in God's favor. The religious trauma, you're going to hell, you have to be a certain way in order to not go to hell. And that really stuck with me. So as a very young child, I really felt that the more I walked whatever walk Jesus wanted me to do, that was going to be what would keep me from damnation, lake of fire, all of that. But even if it wasn't something motivated by fear, I think sometimes we kind of get ourselves in a path, maybe because someone says, oh, you'd be really good at that, or you should do that because of the money, or, you always want to make sure you have enough money, and you can't do something just out of love or just out of passion, because you got to be able to afford all these bills and all these things. And as a society, we really look away from being on the walk that we may be created to walk, but also not to worry so much about the money. Now, I say that now when we're all in a situation where the rich are getting uber rich, and the rest of us, no matter where you fall on the spectrum of income, we aren't getting rich. We can see our 401ks and our shares going down, not making money. We're buying more stocks and not seeing the payback for that. So for those of us who maybe were raised that you had to have a certain job in order to get enough money to survive, we're probably scrambling right now. I know that I am making less money than I've ever made in my life, and I was never making tons of money. I worked very, very hard in all the jobs that I did and worked long hours, and there were people that I knew that were doing jobs way different than mine, or maybe even the same job as I was doing, but they were doing it in a different county, and their income was definitely higher than mine. And yet, I really love loving what I do. And even though I would say it's not about the money, when my income would be compared to somebody in just like the next town over and they had a better bracket in their county, they paid therapists more, they paid teachers more, whatever I was doing at the time, there was always a county that you could make a better living if you moved. And yet we always lived where we lived, and we were comfortable there. And I don't want to just work for money. I want to follow my passions. I want to follow the nudges that I get from Spirit. I want to be the person that can make a difference in someone's life. I want to be happy at the end of the day that I created something or produced something that touched someone's heart or gave them a lift up or stopped them from hurting themselves. And that's a tall order. I mean, it's not like I started out as a child saying, I want to save the world and every person that's depressed. That's not what I thought. And I never knew that that could actually really happen. But after I wrote the memoir, and even on this podcast, there were people that would give me feedback that this podcast and the memoir really stopped them from doing something to themselves that they had been contemplating. And they may never have taken that next step. And to God, I pray that they wouldn't have. And for anyone else, that has felt suicidal or felt really depressed and felt like because of your religious trauma that there was nothing else left for you, I am grateful that people who have found this podcast found that there was something more to hold on to. We used to know only what we were told. And now we sometimes don't know what we were told. It's more murky. It doesn't feel as clear. Sometimes it feels just wrong. I got into a conversation the other day with a friend of mine that we went to college together. Now, it was a Christian college. I was planning to be a missionary, minor in youth ministry. And if you've read my memoir, if you've heard that story, it didn't work out that way. But there were certain friends that kind of continued to stay in my orbit, not really close all the time, but just in my orbit. And since college, we've only stayed in touch on Facebook, not very much, but a little bit on Facebook. And then also he goes to the church where my parents started going after we quit going to my papa's church because he either had a church too far away or, he eventually was out of ministry. And so we settled on this other church and he showed up there. And so the thing is that when you have a background in really conservative religion and you've made friends in that genre of religion, some people don't ever move from that because what they used to know in whatever they were told and they've held on to it, they don't move from that. They just continue to believe what they believed and believe it's all true and that there's nothing else that they need to think about. And I was completely different. I used to know, based on what I was told, that all homosexuals are going to hell just because they were homosexuals. I used to know that if you didn't, really serve God with your whole heart, your whole mind, and everything all the time, every single second of the day, you need to be spouting off some kind of, biblical something, then you're not a good Christian. I used to know, based on what I was told, that if you hang out with people who are less than what God expects, then you are also part of that sin. That's kind of what got me kicked out of my uncle's house, is that he thought, once he figured out that my very best friend in graduate school, that in my mind was still just a very best friend because I was not gay, but because I was associating with a known homosexual, that made me tainted. And he was not going to have that around. Now, he was a minister, very, very cool minister, great at campground preaching. I mean, I loved him. He was a youth minister guy and a preacher. I mean, but he would always do the youth camps, and he was just amazing. And I loved him very, very much. And And I still do love him. He died, I think, maybe last year, or the year before. Time just runs together, doesn't it, anymore? But he used to be just so dynamic, and I put all of my trust in him. And when he decided that I wasn't worthy to be in his home, that started to change things that I used to know. Because I didn't understand how my best friend that I was getting to know in graduate school had such a wonderful heart, a peaceful heart, a loving heart, kind to animals, always helping other people. And even though she disagreed on the way I believed in my Christian faith, she was very spiritual, very aware of God in her life, just didn't need to have the four walls and the preacher tell her so. And she really felt very spiritual outside on a trail, in the woods, and just with her dog. And she didn't need anybody to approve of her. Let me say that again. She didn't need anybody to approve of her. I have never been that way. I have never been that way. I've always been so external that it didn't matter if I felt like I did a good job. I needed somebody to say it because I didn't trust my belief about anything. Growing up, no matter what I thought or what I felt, there was always this conflict about that. I could always have done it better. The comment would always be, oh, well, that was a really good story, but, oh, you did really good, but. And the but, as we know, erases whatever came before that. So I grew up in a world where I couldn't trust what I did to be okay enough. And there were times that I would say what I was feeling, and the answer back often, because it was a negative feeling, whether it was angry or sad about something, no, you don't. You don't have to feel that way about that. You don't feel that. And when you hear that enough, similar to what you hear in church, you internalize that, and it becomes really, really a part of your belief system, even if you really don't want to believe it. It just is. It becomes a part of your belief system, unless you have a really strong inner guidance system, which I do believe my beloved has. She's always had it. She doesn't care if she's liked by other people. She just expects people not to probably agree with her, and she's always stayed true to her own values and sensibility and her own way of doing things. Now, she can shift. I mean, if she finds somebody that has said it's a better way to do, try this, she's open to changing something, but she doesn't need the approval for anything that she's done. She likes compliments, I'm sure, but she doesn't thrive off of them. She doesn't need them. She doesn't have to have them. So what we used to know, what if we start feeling like we don't know it anymore? Well, let me just say that folks that have gone through this whole tearing down their faith and then building something back, that type of thing leaves a big gap while you're doing the other thing, like building it back. And for me, that scared me because I don't like a void. I don't like to not know something. So I kind of took the other way, and we've talked about this too. I've taken that other way of looking at things that I know are toxic in what I've believed, and that even though, it was presented as true in church, there was also another way to look at it. Now, I could not do this on my own, by the way. This is something that came once I was able to find an Episcopal Church with a very amazing priest who broke down scriptures in ways that were so relatable and had you understanding that what we were told based on the Greek and who wrote it and who said it and why they wrote it and why they said it. That was something that even in the Christian Bible school, I didn't get that type of breakdown, and apparently some of my minister friends from college didn't get it either, because they're still very stuck on what they know. So this friend I was telling you about, I posted something that just talked about how, Jesus was probably progressive, and, there were things about in the Bible that we don't necessarily have to hold so tight to because it's not relevant in the walk with Christ, really, like the book of Leviticus, and how there's all these purity laws and all of these things about foods you can't eat and things you can and things you can touch and things you can't. Now, later, Jesus had said, hey, you don't have to have certain foods that you don't eat. It's okay. But in the time that they were living, and you're going through the Exodus, and you're out there in the wilderness, and you better pay attention to some of that stuff about foods and cleanliness and everything, or you're going to get sick and you're going to die. So there's always this relevance of what was the lesson to that group of people. What were they living through? What was the purpose of that? And does it really apply to here, now, today, in 2026, while we're up against toxicity and bigotry and racism? What's true for us now? Love your neighbor is still true, but I also understand that loving my neighbor doesn't mean that I'm going to agree with them, that I'm going to approve of what they do, and I probably won't invite them to dinner because I don't need to in order to validate me being kind to someone and doing what I can to help and knowing that I can't change them and I don't have to live in their inner circle. And that's okay. When Jesus said the greatest commandment is to love your God and love your neighbor and love yourself, he didn't say, open your door, let them move in, let them bring in all their toxic energy, and let them eat all your food and not replace it. He didn't say that. He said, love them. And some of us are still having a hard time with that commandment because of all the wounds that we carry. Doesn't mean we're not going to get there. It just means that, we're a little slow to roll in that direction. I do love people that I disagree with. And I love my friend who gave a post after that video that I showed and really kind of came back about how that's not true. And my sister even liked it. And my point is that, I'm disappointed in people who continue to just stay in such a narrow space that no one else is welcome and that no growth is ever given. I do believe it's okay to question, and I do believe that it's okay to move forward in a bolder and better way. So if the things that you used to know are not fitting with you, then what happens? Well, we have some options. The options are we can either stay stuck out of fear, or we can look at each thing that we used to know and now we don't, as what does love replace that with? What will love do to that thought, that belief, that expectation? What would love do in that situation? Exploring your faith, exploring your personal choices, exploring your profession, exploring your relationship. If you feel like everything about one of those particulars or something else is completely now foreign to you, what happens next? I ask questions. I ask lots of questions. So if I'm ever feeling, and I promise you, since 1983, my beloved and I have known each other, either lived together or saw each other every weekend when we were living apart for a couple of years due to jobs that we got in different cities. And even before, I was gay in my head, and also when I learned that I really have always been gay, I always ask lots of questions. If something felt off in our friendship and then in our relationship, I can't let things go. If something's not feeling right, I ask questions. I get to the bottom of whatever it is, and we have a conversation. Is it always smooth and loving? Absolutely not. There are times that we're both at opposite ends, and it takes us a little bit to get ourselves back to the place where we've always said we are back to back and front to front in our relationship. And that means in the beginning, it was that, it's almost the symbolism because I love pictures and visuals, and it meant that we would be hugging each other because we love each other so much. And I'm watching her back and she's watching mine. And then as we evolved, one day it seemed like it was like we were so needing to stand together against the world that we became back to back. We were, almost like melded together back to back, and we were watching out for threats. So whether we are, front to front or back to back, we've always had each other's best interests at heart, and we've always been very protective of the love we have because neither one of our families was ready for this information. I was disowned in the beginning, and her mother refused to talk about it, although she never withdrew her love, but she refused to talk about it. Her father was very open and approving, which later there was, a reason for that we didn't know, but, he was very open, and he and his wife always embraced us as a couple. It took her mom a year to not talk about it and then to show up at our Holy Union with her best friend and come to our gay wedding, and she was fine. She could have told us ahead of time. That would have been really nice. But that's what we do. We come together and we ask questions and we talk it through, and we take as long as we need to get back to that place of commitment and love. There have been, I can't tell you how many times in our life that we could have dropped it and moved on. However, both of us are so connected in our souls that it never would have lasted. And so we know that. We know that we have this connection that has always been there, and maybe even beyond when we even met. If you believe in astrological things and pre-lifes, I just feel like we've always known each other, and we just continue to reconnect and get stronger as a couple. So start asking questions. Ask questions about the job you're in. Ask questions about the things you were taught in church. Ask questions about the direction you're wanting to go. Ask yourself questions about where you learned that fear of losing money and not having enough. Where were you taught that your happiness is not as important as your bank account? Because I want you to be the person that God created you to be. And sometimes we find ourselves in a job, in a relationship, in a church that we are in because of the fear that we're not doing it right, and we have to hold on to those old things that we used to know to say, well, as long as I'm a preacher or a teacher or this or that, whatever it is, God's going to find favor in me. I promise you, you were created by God, and you already have the favor because you have the breath of life of God in you. And you are always favored. And you will not lose that love. Even when you're doing really nefarious, awful things and your neighbors can't love you, God will always love you. You might disappoint them, but I don't believe that God's love dies. And I don't believe that God's love died for anyone. And I know that Jesus, no matter what you've done, is going to have your back and also make sure that you are spoken up for when people are trying to stone you. So you might not have agreed with how she was disrespecting her own body, not because she was a streetwalker or whatever people are thinking she was, The thing is that he knew she wasn't happy, and whatever was holding her back, he wanted her released from that. Now, yeah, I've heard somebody just recently talk about that there was sin there and go and sin no more. But what that means is sin, as you can remember, means missing the mark. So did she sin because she was making a living because nobody else was helping her out? Was she making a living having sex with people? I don't know. I wasn't there. But if it's missing the mark and not actually the action that you did, then that means that she might have missed the understanding that there may be another way for her to survive without degrading her body and hurting her body. Who knows? I wasn't there. But I do know that Jesus stopped the stoning because whatever it was that she did, it wasn't worth her being killed over. Because, one of the commandments from God to Moses was don't murder people. One of the 10 commandments does not say don't be homosexual. Did you ever notice that? I think I like that part. So the 10 commandments, basically, because the folks then needed to have something clear and have it on stone, so things were put on stone. Before that, there were no stones. There was the Torah, and people read off of scrolls, and then they hashed it out, disagreed. Nobody thought everything was absolute. In the Jewish community and synagogues, you don't just sit there and hear one person tell you what to think. Everybody has an opinion, and everybody gives it, and they hash things out. And I don't think they ever come to a solid, maybe, understanding. None of us can, because we weren't there. We just weren't there. But one thing I really believe that we know is that we are still here because we are still favored and we were created, and God has not given up on us yet. And I don't think God will. So here is your instructions for after this podcast. Sometime, whether it's today after this podcast or sometime else, find a time to be by yourself. Get a cup of tea. Find a place with some soft music. Get somewhere out in nature and just start asking the questions from your life with what you used to know but now is rubbing you wrong or feeling like it doesn't fit, and allow thoughts and feelings and possibilities to flow in. Because as long as we're above ground and still breathing, we still got things to do, and it may not be what we used to know. And ooh, the possibilities are endless. Thank you, everybody, for honoring me with your time today, for listening, subscribing, sharing, and supporting this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to see more information and links to connect with me, go to the Gay with God show page at empoweredmidge.podbean.com and scroll down to the bottom of that show page and you'll see how to connect with me. There you'll find a couple of things. One, you can find a way to get my memoir and get a signed copy. You can also find a link that says that you can have coaching with me and you get one confidential free session just to get to know each other. And if there's nothing you need to work on or you don't feel a connection, that's fine. But I want to always give people a free session in the beginning just so that we can connect if you need a connection. And then you decide where to go from there. No pressure, no follow-up, just whatever you need. Also, check out our Facebook group, Gay with God, where we do a monthly group entitled My Faith Journey. If you need support to help you, just in a small group, online with Zoom, just to talk about your day, to listen to something that somebody decided to talk about, and you might join in, you might not. But, it's a really good supportive small group that has just been amazing to be a part of. And we're there once a month. I think it's the fourth Tuesday of every month, but check it out. And make sure that you answer all the questions, because that's how I know, where you're coming from, and we make sure that we stay as safe as possible, because there are people who get into groups just to be disruptive, and we want to make sure that we're all on the same page. So answer all the questions. Thank you. If you're listening to this podcast and are questioning whether you can be gay and be in a relationship with the God of your understanding, if you identify as LGBTQIA+, or not even sure if you are gay, God has always been within you, even when you didn't know it. You have always been gay with God. Thank you, everybody. Stay tuned to see how you can join the Gay with God community. And as always, you are loved. I want to invite you to become a part of the Gay with God community. How can you do that? Stay connected by messaging me your thoughts and comments in the comment section under the downloads of the show on the Gay with God show page. Subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen, and share so we can increase our community outreach and be a light to those who are struggling to claim their faith. Consider being a sponsor so I can highlight your service in our community. We are all worthy of respect and a relationship with the God of our understanding. I want to thank you in advance for supporting this podcast. Together, we as a community will keep this show visible and our community stronger. Deep gratitude to my friend Tim McClendon of Tim McClendon Music for allowing me to use an excerpt from Interlude 4, a song found on his CD entitled Sundance.